How am I supposed to know what to get? I should be using these, shouldn't I? What if it breaks? What do I even pick? I guess these will work. What will the cashier think? Nobody ever taught me this stuff.
Classrooms, pencils, paper, desks, loud voices, gossip, laughter, essays, quizzes, exams, sex. And one of these is not like the others. It got your attention though, didn't it? Sex is really good at that, even though we hate to admit it. Almost nothing is more taboo in our society than sexual intercourse. We turn away from it, even though it makes up the foundation of our lives. It's in our music, our consumerism. We revolve around sex, yet we refuse to talk about it. So let's talk about it. Welcome to Oklahoma, where the wind came sweeping down the plains and sex doesn't exist. In a mostly red state, sex is something that is kept behind closed doors and swept under rugs, and that includes sexual education. There are schools like those in Tulsa that are taking steps to improve the sexual education in their classrooms. However, more rural high schools believe that this is something that should only be talked about at home with parents.
We do not have a quote-unquote curriculum regarding sex ed. We do offer education through our science classes, through our biology classes, things like that. Trying to teach something that would be universally accepted by all parents is never going to happen.
The atmosphere around sex in Oklahoma is not a comfortable one either. Beliefs and opinions that circulate the sexual conversation are mostly conservative in nature. Sex is between a man and a woman. Wait until marriage. Abstinence is the only form of birth control. And conservative conversations lead to conservative teachings. Parents are most often hesitant to have the sex talk with their kids, let alone discuss sexual health and well-being.
And I understand that there are a lot of households that are not safe to be able to have these kinds of, personal conversations. And so as a result, I think what you end up having are kids who feel isolated, which might either add to the shame or it might add to the intrigue. And I don't think either one of those things are necessarily positive.
And unfortunately, Oklahoma classrooms are not much better. Middle school and high school is an uncomfortable time for everyone. Trying to make new friends while navigating new classes and new teachers. Now let's throw puberty on top of all that. Not so fun, huh? Bodies are changing, and with that comes changing thoughts about your body and the bodies around you.
One of the things that we talk about is that puberty is this universal experience that everyone goes through, and no one's talking about it enough. And so next to infancy, adolescence is the second largest time in human development. And so there's a lot going on, and you're older, and so you're not a baby, and so you're trying to figure out as a young person how to navigate the world as your body is changing, as your brain is changing, as your friendships are changing. And so there's so many things that young people need.
And kids very early understand that, we don't have the same genitals, and that is confusing. It's that same thing of if you're waiting until 6th grade, if you're waiting until, you've lost the opportunity to really have, to empower kids, right? To empower children to understand what's happening to their bodies, the risks that are associated with that, and there is a problem.
The once innocent crush on the boy next door turns into something a little bit more. Despite the commonality between these thoughts in middle school and high schoolers, there is still a stigma around it. And nobody is talking about it. This includes people like teachers and educators. Why is this though? Aren't they supposed to be the people that teach us and educate us on the unknown and what's unfamiliar? It's because they don't have to.
Well, there aren't any current requirements for sex ed in Oklahoma. The only real law that's on the books is an old law that is useful around HIV education and HIV prevention, really. So that's really all that there is. And there's a lot of, so it's kind of based on school district to school district, whether or not they are going to get some type of sexual health information to their students. And so it just kind of depends on the leadership of each school district, what they would like.
I think the number one reason why Oklahoma doesn't have a set curriculum in regard to sex ed is because getting the entire state to agree on what would be taught would be very difficult. You're going to have different ideals between urban school districts and very rural school districts like we are here. So in order to get everybody to agree on that, I think would be very difficult. I think you would have difficulty getting the political landscape to agree in order to create that legislation.
While Oklahoma schools focus in on not having sex so you don't have babies, this type of curriculum does the opposite. Let's look outside of Oklahoma for a second. New Jersey has one of the most comprehensive sex education curriculums in the nation. They rank number 43 in STD rates at 472 per 100,000. Oklahoma is number 7. That's 843 per 100,000. Clearly, we're doing something wrong. Here's where I tell you that I'm not just your narrator and guide through this documentary. I have my own story to share with you. I grew up in a rural town in Oklahoma with a graduating class of 52. My father was very conservative in his beliefs and never liked to talk very much about emotions or feelings. My mother was extremely hesitant to talk about things like sex with me. Needless to say, I never received the sex talk from either of them. Even today, we refuse to talk about any of this stuff together as adults. On top of that, my high school was the same way. I didn't even have the privilege of receiving the HIV and AIDS talk from my school. My high school didn't provide any of that to its students. Now let's hear from a different point of view.
Okay, my name is Amelia Howdegui, Amelia Jauregui, the little accent on the A. So I am born and raised in Texas, grew up entirely in Plano, and went to school at Liberty High School in Frisco. Yeah, so growing up, I was really close with my parents. We talked about a lot of different things. Obviously, as a child, sex isn't something that comes up often, but when I was in about 4th or 5th grade, I did receive the talk from my parents. They sat down on the couch in front of me and then said, okay, if you want to keep watching the show, we have to tell you about something. And again, I had no idea what was going on. And then they're like, we need to tell you about sex. And I was like, had no idea what that was. And so then they ended up giving me the talk. I will say they kept it very kind of like scientific, biological, whatever. But they did also talk about the emotional effects of it. And again, they put it in words that I could understand at age 11 or whatever grade, like however old I was in 5th grade.
Those in the LGBTQ+ community are more often left behind when it comes to sexual education. Almost all curriculum, when it's included, is focused on heterosexual relationships.
But I really do think that sex in the relation of LGBT community was lacking, and that's something that I really wish I would have had, because trying to navigate that on my own has been complicated and difficult and something that overwhelms me. And again, I don't think that's anyone's fault, but I do think that's something that could benefit a lot of people, especially because especially in 2023, people are more out and open and comfortable being who they are from an earlier and earlier age, which I think is great, but I think the education needs to catch up with that.
Being uncomfortable with my sexuality and not having that safe space at home or with my school has made it extremely difficult to become comfortable with who I am. My experience in a rural Oklahoma high school is still affecting me today. I'm still not entirely comfortable with sex. I have a really difficult time communicating boundaries with my partners.
I was really glad that they gave me that talk, even though it was really overwhelming in the moment, because from a young age, like when I could understand it and they told me about it, then I had this understanding growing up and only learned more and more throughout school or friends or peers, but I had that good base from my parents, who are obviously people that I love and trust.
When students don't have that strong foundation of information and knowledge of sex, most of them will learn it where they can. Most often that means the internet. This creates really unhealthy expectations of sex, leading to more negative outcomes in the long run, like teen pregnancy and domestic violence.
What I'm most concerned about is the relationship with and connectedness to violence. We know that the statistics that we hold as a state for domestic violence and sexual abuse and sexual assault are frightening. Knowing that 1 in 3 women before they graduate high school have been sexually assaulted and 1 in 5 men.
Our kids are more sexualized at an earlier age than they've ever been before. Things that ordinarily would happen with a high school student are now happening as early as 6th and 7th grade. We have to deal with probably the number one thing that we deal with at school in regard to sexual activity is the taking and distribution of nude photographs of students.
Oklahoma schools shout sex equals pregnancy and diseases. While pregnancy and STDs are important topics to cover, they are not the only things that make up sex. Sex is about more than just reproduction. Groups like Amplify Youth Health Collective in Tulsa and Thrive Youth Collective in Oklahoma City are making strides to encourage the comprehensive sex ed in Oklahoma to catch up with similar discussions in other states.
Yeah, so sex ed, a lot of people kind of have in their mind like what they think sex ed is, but comprehensive sex ed is really looking at all of the things that a young person needs to know and learn about. And so it'll talk about healthy relationships, consent, sexual violence prevention, so abuse prevention, talking about birth control, contraception, how to stay safe in relationships. And so there's a really wide variety of topics that are covered.
Breaking down stereotypes and stigmas and giving kids a voice in the conversation.
It's not just kind of a 30-minute or an hour conversation. Yeah, and people do have different viewpoints on that, but what we see consistently, time and time again, and we've done public polling and we've recently done a community needs assessment, that high numbers, the vast majority of parents and adults think that there should be comprehensive sex ed in schools. And for those people who don't, they don't have to participate. Their students don't have to participate, but parents have a right for their students to be receiving this evidence-based, high-quality sex ed in schools. And so lots of parents want this. Lots of parents want it to be taught in schools by experts. And so, for those who don't want it, then that's perfectly fine. And you can choose to not opt your student in, or they can opt out to the program. And so, but what we see over and over through surveys, through conversations that we have with parents all over the community, all over the state, is that parents do want this in schools.
I think it's important. I think it's important for us to open those dialogues up with our kids.
Truly, I think it's incredibly important for kids, knowing again that there are risks associated with certain behaviors, and while it's a beautiful thing, and we should celebrate our bodies and we should not be ashamed, there's also a really important place for understanding the things that can happen.
I do think it's something that everyone should know about because it does affect everyone at some point in their life, whether they are having sex or not. And so it's just important to be educated, and I think restriction would be really detrimental just to the knowledge and health of people and students in Oklahoma. Just having that knowledge and baseline understanding, regardless of what you practice within sex education, is really important just for having a healthy and safe community.
Sex is about learning about your body, about feeling good, exploring your sexuality, and so much more.
I think it's something that needs to be talked about all the time.
It shouldn't be that if you go to this school or that school, you're getting it. Every young person in Oklahoma deserves high quality sex ed and resources and access to trusted adults.